So there is an issue here that always is a problem in coming to a country like Brazil or any country outside of your own and making statements of some generality. And that is that the questions of applicability of results, how generalizable, whether or not the results are useful in other contexts, always plagues the enterprise. There's an issue here that is that most of my data sources, virtually all of them, you'll see, are drawn on American data sources. Because the American data are very rich. We have rich longitudinal data where we follow people over time. And this plays a very important role in our thinking about how skills are formed, how people are formed, how we can and what good policies should be. So much of what I draw on is a rich body of panel data, longitudinal data, repeated observations on people, following people for as long as 30 or 40 years. Now there's a danger, of course, in saying, well, maybe the lessons from the American experience, the US experience, won't transport to other countries. And I think there's always that risk. But also there's, I think, some universal principles that you can extract. And I want to try to extract those principles today. But I also recognize that certain aspects that are quite central to the US discussion need to be revised. And I think that's an ongoing task here, which I hope we can continue. It's partly a matter of the old adage about looking under the streetlight instead of where the problem exactly is. Here I think we can extract some basic lessons about human behavior that have universality. But when I do refer to some aspects of the American situation, I think we need to translate this, and I hope we do this in the course of the discussion into the Brazilian context. So I would argue that in the US and in many countries in the world, the growth of inequality in the labor market is a serious problem. And also the level of inequality is high in many countries. I mean, Brazil being a prominent country, the Gini coefficient being very high. Learned a great deal about the Brazilian labor market and Brazilian inequality from the work of Ricardo Barros. And of course, in most economies, modern economies, the labor market is a major source of income for most persons. It's not necessarily the only source of income, capital being very important. But when we think about the earnings of individuals and citizens, we look to the labor market. And what I want to argue is, and this is a major lesson from the work that has emerged, this body of work I'm going to report on today, is that differences in abilities and skills are the major source of inequality in modern societies. So these abilities play a very important role. Now, if we look, for example, at what policies work and what policies don't work, we have to, recent studies in the economics of skill formation show that these abilities are major determinants of who participates in these activities and what the economic returns are. And we should recognize, and this is a very important lesson, because the word ability is very heavily abused. Ability is sometimes taken to mean IQ. Ability is a very vague concept. It comes across with multiple meanings. So you sometimes see people using ability as IQ, how quickly you can do a test in a controlled situation, even free of context, or as best you can make it free of context. But what is a major lesson today, and what Sergio will be talking more about, is that abilities are multifaceted. And that when we even think of something like mental ability or a cognitive ability, how well we think and achieve, that there are aspects of both pure mental ability as well as motivation, and what we call non-cognitive ability. Now this is extremely important because it's neglected in much recent research. In fact, most of the discussion about education, most of the discussion about the bias, a lot of econometric questions focus on whether smart people are more likely to go to school, and we know they are. But we also should recognize that when we look at how skills are produced in the life cycle, that it's not just IQ, that it really does consist of a range of behaviors which we call non-cognitive. They include things like persistence, motivation, self-discipline. These are things that actually are produced. And these are things we are now coming to understand and that play a major role in understanding what a good policy is. And I'll show you examples of children who are no brighter in terms of IQ, but who are much more successful as a result of an intervention that affected these non-cognitive abilities. So one major lesson of this body of work is that ability, we should no longer think of ability as a number. So much work in economics and social policy, we think about smart people and dumb people. We should understand that there are a whole array of dimensions of what we should call ability. And secondly, that these ability differences across people that are real open up very early. So that's a very important finding and could only be obtained from having longitudinal data, following people over time.